All right, cheers everyone. Welcome to The Water Cooler. The Water Cooler is a show about marketing, sales, and technology. Each episode we focus on bringing advice that works. Today I'm very honored to bring on a new guest, someone you probably haven't heard of. His name's Todd Herman. He's the author, performance advisor, and entrepreneur. For 22 years, his training company, Herman Performance Systems, has focused on helping achievers and ambitious people in sports business achieve wildly outrageous goals while enjoying the process. His new book, The Alter Ego Effect, The Power of Secret Identities to Transform Your Life, is catching the world by storm. Todd, thank you very much for being on today's podcast. Welcome to The Water Cooler.
Jimmy the Mackinator Curaytor. What's going on? Great to be here.
Well, I know it's going to be a good podcast. My phone rings as soon as I start doing the intro, so it's always great to see that happen.
Yeah.
We've been off for a few weeks here. Chris is obviously off this week. I'm going to be taking the lead interviewing Todd. But Todd, this is, I've got so many questions for you lined up today. And I think for our audience who are not familiar with your work, who are not familiar with your philosophies or the movement that you're trying to start, I think it'd be important for us to start by me sharing a little bit about my personal experience, kind of learning about your movement and then reading the book and then sort of what my takeaways were. My initial reaction, and this is important for everyone here to understand, when I start seeing people talk about developing alter egos or identities, I had this sort of visceral, resistance to it, in the sense that I felt like, well, I'm trying to figure out who I am as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a business owner. It's hard enough to figure that out. Then now I've got to go out and develop another identity to figure out, like to deal with the problems I have in my life. So my question to start off with this, because my feelings after the book are so different. Why are people like me resistant to this idea? Because if you read the book, you understand it, you appreciate it, it's logical, it makes sense. But I'm sure, you've been on the circuit now, you've been on interviews, you're promoting the book. I'm sure there's a sort of resistance to this movement, and I'm trying to get your perspective on why.
Sure. So I think one thing to note first before I kind of get into that is, one, I'm a practitioner. And that's really important for people to understand because for 22 years, I've been working with pro, Olympic athletes, public figures, entertainers, and not working with them like in a large event space setting with thousands or hundreds of people. Sure. Yes, I've done those types of things, but I started off specializing in working with people one-on-one, which toes to toes, nose to nose, helping them with performance, which means I only get paid when I help people actually improve, which is a really important thing for people to understand. And so this is 17,000 plus hours working with people that way. And what's important about that is, and anyone listening knows this, that the people who are actually on the field working with the people have a very different lens into how those individuals are actually achieving things. Okay. Sure. And so because I've been working with the elite of the elite, I mean, I'm talking like Real Madrid client, I'm talking South African Springboks, New York Rangers, Yankees, tons of NFL, PGA players, all that kind of stuff. And the stuff that people actually do between the 6 inches of their ears to help them to succeed and what gets put into popular personal development, self-help books, the cliches that are typically propagated are very different things typically. And it's because most people who write books are researchers and journalists, or they're curators of other people's ideas. And they never actually battle tested any of this stuff and had to again, I can't build up a name for myself if I don't help, John Doe player perform and improve. Sure. So, and I say that only to couch this thing. So I became well known in pro sport as being the guy who built up secret identities and alter egos to help them custom create a self inspired by the attributes and qualities and abilities of someone or something else to help pull out their real capabilities, which is kind of what now that you've experienced and gone through the book. And so you're not the first to be challenged by this. And that's because my book challenges a whole bunch of the paradigms that a lot of people live through every single day and are trapped by, which have been created by social narratives and really just by a vast quantity of books that have led people down a pathway of not actually helping you perform and develop yourself.
Sure. So what you're saying, and what I'm hearing you saying, then how it's translating in my mind, Todd, is the reason people are resistant to this idea is because they fundamentally think it's just simply another self-help book. And what you're saying is the vast majority of self-help books are written from a third-party sort of lens where they're on the outside looking in and trying to observe peak performance and translate that into practical concepts. And what you're saying is you don't really know until you know. And it's funny to hear you say that because at Curaytor, the advice I get from people about running a business is so fundamentally different if they actually have run a business versus someone 100%. Who has studied businesses. Because people who run businesses all understand one basic thing, that the world of running a business is a world of trade-offs. You are always having to balance between what you want to do, what's available, what's possible, and then at the same exact time, prioritizing that in a way that helps you achieve that larger goal. And that trade-off is like, it is a very difficult thing that every entrepreneur deals with every single day. And whether it's using your resources, your money, your team, it's a constant battle that you have with yourself. So I want to talk about your mom for 1 second, because I listened to an interview you had and I heard you mention your mother, and your mother gave you some really great advice. For people that don't know, you're a farm boy, right? Came from Alberta, and you're Alberta, Canada, and you were leaving the farm, and your mom said something to you, and I'd like you to share that with the audience, because I think it's important people understand this concept. Because I thought it was, I don't know your mom clearly, and I don't know what her background is, except that she obviously, raised her family on a farm with your dad. But I'm always struck when people who don't seem like they have any qualifications to be giving advice give remarkably good advice. Yeah.
So background on my mom, just quickly before I answer that, is in America, people understand the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest honor you can give a civilian in America. My mom basically won that equivalent in Canada for her charitable work and stuff. So I had just one of the great female leaders that I could possibly have, or just leaders in general, not even female. Don't have to couch it with that, but just a great leader. So I was the third boy, and loved getting the chance. I grew up on a huge farm and ranch in southern Alberta, Canada. Live here in New York City now, but I never developed the affinity towards my farm and ranch like my other brothers did, because anytime it was a 3-boy job, my older brothers would always make me do the worst of the work.
Yeah, sure.
And I was a massive extrovert, and I just wanted to be around lots of people. So mom, knowing that I was going off to college, university, I had a football scholarship, knew full well that I was not going to be returning. And as she was kind of prepping me, we were sitting around the lunch table, and she said, we're probably not going to be able to help you in whatever your pursuits are, in that we're not going to have advice for you because, we know the farm, we know the ranch, and, integrity, character, that kind of stuff. But just our only advice would be that whatever you want to go and do, find whoever is the absolute best at that, and go and tuck yourself under their wing and go and learn from them. And greatest piece of advice I've ever gotten. And some of it's because my dad is well known in our area as being, might sound crazy to other people, as being the best farmer and rancher. Because people be like, they might think it's a very individual thing, but there's a lot of not psychology. There's a lot of thinking and stuff that goes into what seeds you plant, what's the prediction of weather and stuff. And he was doing all the stuff that's now commonplace today, where organic farmers talk about. My dad was doing it 40 years ago. And my mom led the recycling mission for our entire area in 1981 when recycling wasn't cool. So she was just like, go tuck yourself under the wing, and because you're going to accelerate your path towards success so much faster. And that's exactly what I did. And I think it's one of the things that's lost nowadays. You probably appreciate it. It's so many people want to race to the top, or maybe get the accolades and get the labels attached to them. I'm a president or a CEO, or I'm an entrepreneur. And I'm glad I played the long game, which actually ended up shortening the game for me. Because I went and tucked myself underneath the wing of the #1 mental game coach on the planet. He literally wrote the Bible of the industry, Harvey Dorfman. And man, what I learned from him in just 33 days, I couldn't have learned in 10 years.
Yeah, it struck me as remarkably good advice, and obviously your mom is a pretty remarkable person. Hearing a little bit about her backstory and certainly her family, but it reminds me a lot of this basic idea that something I always try to do when I interview someone, Todd, is try to get an understanding who their heroes are, how their world should have shaped how their environment shaped their worldview, and to hear that story tells me a lot about you and tells me a lot about sort of why you have pursued the career you pursued and how you approach things. Did your mom have an alter ego?
You know what? I actually haven't talked to her much about that. I can't say that. I know some of the people that inspired her, but I don't know that she had a specific alter ego.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about my parents. My dad had only one ego, and it was a unrelenting tyrant as we grew up. So, but he's become a different person as he's gotten older with grandkids. So, so moving on beyond that, I think it's important for the audience here to take a step back and let's just talk about this idea for a moment about just the concept of the alter ego. And I want to start not by having you describe it, but I want you to take a moment and say, what happens when you get it right? So let's say you're able to develop an alter ego, and we'll talk a little bit more of that later in the show. What happens when you get it right? Because I think we got to lead with dessert for our audience. They got to understand, okay, if I can follow this path here, what's the actual eventuality or the outcome I'm going to be able to achieve?
You become the person you most want to be. That's what it is. That's why I say it's the alter ego effect. As someone who's built out tens of thousands of alter egos now, the quote that most encapsulates the promise of what this, and by the way, this is a very natural psychological phenomenon that exists in every single person. So like I've said this from stages, I talked to Tom Ferry about this as well, who's a good buddy of yours too, that every single human being that's listening to this, watching this, has 10 friends. Everyone on the planet has already used this idea because it's a natural part of how we develop ourselves as youngsters. And then we get older and we start to use our frontal lobe and the reasoning and the judgment skills. And we think that the stuff that we did when we were younger was actually childish, when in fact, it was actually us tapping into a fundamental growth pattern that allows us to find out what we're made of when we think of what could I do if I jumped off the couch as Superman? What could I do if I was LeBron James out on our front driveway and shooting hoops? Because what that does is it detaches from whatever you think your limitations are and allows you to step into and embody those traits, those qualities, those abilities, that thinking pattern of someone that you look up to. And so the quote is from Cary Grant, the Hollywood Golden Era actor. And he said, I pretended to be somebody I wanted to be, and I became that person, or he became me, but at some point we met. And it's undeniable the man was well known for being charismatic, debonair, good looking, well-dressed guy. And that's what he wanted to create for himself. And the challenge is that whether real estate professionals or anyone in the industry have is that you're out there on the field. That's why I love talking to groups like this. You're on the field, and when you leave the day or when you get to the end of your month, the scoreboard is up. It tells you the results of your week, your month, all that stuff. And so you're on the field and there's no hiding there. And just the pursuit of that demands that we have to get past some of our self-judgments, our own insecurities, our doubts. And so like what you had said earlier, the great mistake that the self-help and personal development world or leadership world has given to people is trying to get people to discover who they are. And it's actually a trapping question. Like when I ask you, Jimmy, so who's Jimmy? That's like asking someone, like the two hardest pages to ever write on a website are your About Me page or your resume. Right? Because you know that you're more than that.
Sure.
And it traps many people and prevents us from getting ourselves out there. And so that alter ego, that thing that we're most inspired by, that we can, detach from our own story, allows us to pull out of us the real us.
I remember a quote, and I don't know who said it, and hopefully you guys can find it and share it, but it was like, someone said, I believe that the root of all unhappiness is the pursuit of happiness. And it was something along those lines, which is like you're trying to find your truest self, but like you just all that self-reflection, I'm sure it has value in some capacity, but ultimately it's not necessarily the right question that we should be asking ourselves, to your point.
No, it's not. And the better question to ask, by the way, isn't, because who are you is such an esoteric idea.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas anyone that knows me, I'm a meat and potatoes and kale guy. So much of the self-help world is very much popsicle, cotton candy and bubblegum. Tastes great, doesn't satiate the appetite for ambition. Whereas I'm going to serve up stuff that gets in your face, just like your reaction to the alter ego stuff was. But it is undeniable, the science I have in the book, all of the stories that are in there. And I didn't invent the alter ego. I invented the process to train people into using it. But it's baked into everyone. But to your point though, is challenging those paradigms that people have and breaking through that resistance of, trying to be, answering the question, who are you? Better question to ask is, what are you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because what are you gets to like substance now. Like, what are you? What are you made of? Here's what I know what people are made of, and it goes on from there.
Yeah, it's in my Twitter bio, I've had the same quote for the last, I don't know, however long I've been on Twitter for, but it's a quote from Herb Kelleher, the former CEO of Southwest Airlines, who recently passed away. He said, "We have a strategic plan. It's called doing things." And so you and I are in alignment there, because I think ultimately a lot of the self-help movement is, as you said, very esoteric. And I'm not an esoteric kind of guy. I think anyone who's in the trenches, it's nice to have that part of your life, but it's just not practical from a day-to-day. It might expand your thinking. So here's a question. What do you think about, and maybe this is, for people who are still maybe resisting this idea, because I got the head tilt this morning, Todd, where I was at Thinking Cup, and there's just a local coffee shop here. It's like our version of Starbucks, but better and local, and all that fun stuff. And the barista, who we know really well, this guy named Dow, he goes, "Hey, what do you got going on today?" I said, "Well, I'm interviewing this guy named Todd Herman, who wrote this book called The Alter Ego Effect. It's about, developing alter egos to deal with sort of these really important parts of your life." And I did a pretty shitty job of, describing the book. But anyways, he kind of went, huh. And it was like this moment of like skepticism, right? Like it was the Bo Jackson moment. Like he was kind of like interested, but like kind of skeptical. Yeah. So my question is,
you know what it is? It's not skepticism. Sorry to cut you off. Sure. It's not skepticism. It's actually reconciliation. Because so you'll appreciate this. So my book broke the record in the publishing world in the fiction and nonfiction space, so all book space, for having the most publishers bid on it. 19 publishers wanted to publish The Alter Ego Effect. And sitting down with people, they would go, "You know what? I get the idea." And then you get inside and you're like, wow, there's actually a process to this. Sure. So what people are doing is the skepticism is the veneer thing that people want to do in order to protect that, oh, I'm not going to be fake. Because this has nothing to do with being fake. This isn't the fake it till you make it thing. This is a natural human phenomenon that exists. But it's reconciling that, geez, I think I've actually used that before. Yeah. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting observation, because I think that's what my reaction was when I read the book. My initial resistance was, seems like an insane idea. I'm already trying to figure out who the hell I am. So the idea of developing another identity, and I want you to talk a little bit about egos and identities later, but felt overwhelming. But because I'm doing the interview, I had to read the book. I was forced into reading the book because you're on the podcast. It'd be incredibly disrespectful for me to just interview without reading the book. So I read the book, and my feelings towards the end of it was, yes, I am actually already doing this in many parts of my life, but I haven't quite given it a name, is the point.
Yes.
So here's my question, because I want to go back to this original question, which is, in the absence of developing an alter ego, as an entrepreneur, what happens?
You end up massively under-indexing your capabilities, because entrepreneurship is the fastest path to personal growth you could ever take. Like, I mean, I'm talking, I've worked with all the athletes in 78 plus different sports. Every single retired athlete that gets into entrepreneurship will say, I will gladly put my ass back onto that football field and get smashed and tackled than try to deal with this world of entrepreneurship. Because sport is all about, there's sidelines, there's rules, there's all these demarcations that are there to kind of make sense of it. Entrepreneurship, boom, it's a amoeba that just spreads and morphs itself. And so when you get into it, you're like, you get into it because maybe you're good or you're really interested in solving one thing, and then you're confronted with the fact that you're terrible at about 90% of the rest of the stuff that demands the other demands inside your business world. And then what happens is you have people give you advice that say, stick to your strengths, only do your strengths, play to your genius zone and all this. And yet when you really think about how human beings develop themselves, we develop ourselves through blisters. We don't develop ourselves by only satiating our appetite of work with the things that we truly enjoy. And if you only do that, you're going to really get to the end of your life and realize that you could have developed so many more skills than you should have. And so, the reason I say blisters is one of my other great influencers is Joseph Campbell, who, if people don't know, wrote the Hero with a Thousand Faces, developed this amazing model called the hero's journey, and was basically someone who codified all the myths and legends throughout history. And he had this famous quote, George Lucas talked about it quite a bit, called "Follow your bliss." But I worked with the Joseph Campbell Foundation, and it's actually a misquote. What he actually said was, "Follow your blisters, because in your blisters you'll find your bliss." And when you think about, and so most people don't pursue their blisters, they don't sink into them, or they don't sink into some of the aspects of their entrepreneurial self, and that's because they say, "Well, I'm not good at sales," or "I'm not good at promotion and marketing," and it's like, no. The current way that you look at yourself and how you're seeing yourself isn't good at it, because of course the narrative you have sucks. But I have to market. And so when I put on that marketing hat, instead of me trying to challenge against my own stuff, I'm like, you know what? Who loves marketing? And who would help me get this message that I have, or this product out there, unvarnished, untarnished, with, couching statements that would, make me appear as being somewhat insecure about my offer. And so if that's what, and then I'm going to be inspired to act through that. And that's the great part of a human imagination. It just opens up just all these neurons to help us fire and wire towards something that's a lot better.
And what comes to mind is I hear you say the word, under indexing, which is saying that people, and I think there's one other part that you mentioned in the book that I would just sort of add to what you said there, which is you're talking about performance, which is you're not reaching your potential as an entrepreneur if you don't figure out a way to sort of deal with and approach these moments of impact, as you describe it, with a plan, with an identity, with a plan. The other part of it that you talk about in the book, and I think it's an incredibly important topic for people in this space of entrepreneurship, is the sort of the mental health aspect of it, in the sense that if your identity is tied to the business and you only have one identity, the ebbs and flows of that business, which every person who's listening right now, Todd, has experienced this, the ebbs and flows spill into your personal life everywhere. And and the people around you suffer because of it. One of the most influential interviews I've ever listened to in my career in business was by a guy named Jerry Colonna. Jerry Colonna is a Buddhist. He is a self-help guy, and he's a guy who has run a business, sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars, and his life was basically empty after the fact. And he talks about one of the pieces of advice that he gave that stuck with me was separating your identities, which is sort of what you are talking about clearly. Like he was taking it from the Buddhist approach, which again, it was not my area, but he's taking from the Buddhist approach of separating the identity, saying the person who runs the business is not the same person who goes home with the family. And if you can separate those two things, you're going to enjoy your life a little bit more, and you're going to be able to ride the ebbs and flows. So it's funny because what you're doing, as you said at the beginning, is you're not creating a category, you're giving it a name. And and that's what's so inspiring to me about this mission you have and the movement you're creating, is you're giving a name and a playbook to something that most successful entrepreneurs, if not the vast majority of them, already do every single day. So I think the idea, when I hear you say that, the idea of under-indexing, underperforming is really important. But the other side of it is like anyone who's you've been in business now for, I think in your bio, 22 years? Like if every day was up and down based on the business, like psychologically, it would just wear you down.
100%. 100%. And then, I talked about at the beginning of chapter number 3, a friend, Ian, who was a college champion in tennis, and was on his pathway to being a top-ranked guy in the USTA and playing all the tournaments and stuff. And he burned himself out on the court, and he said, "Todd, when I was failing, or when I lost a game in tennis, I felt like I was failing as a human being." Right? That's a perfect example of someone who had one identity. And I've worked with so many different athletes who are getting to the end of their career, and it's a challenging thing because all they see themselves as is a football player or a golfer or whatever. And entrepreneurs do this. They say, "I'm an entrepreneur," and that's their only identity. To Jerry's point, that's what I talk about big time in the book, is that no, you got to see yourself. You don't have one identity. It's actually one of the things that was very misleading in the psychology world for like 80 years, the idea that you had a single self. In fact, that's what they propagated as, people who had the best mental health saw themselves as having one identity. And now that entire philosophy has shifted and changed. And the fastest growing field of psychology right now. And this is really important. This is like one of those, everyone kind of lean in on this part, because it really helps you to sink your teeth into the value of this idea, which is the fastest growing field of psychology right now is called multiple self theory, which is that the individuals who see themselves as having many selves, many roles that they play in life, are actually the healthiest mentally, meaning that they have the lowest rates of depression and any sort of mental health disorders, anxiety, stress, depression, and things like that. And so me, as someone who's been building out these alter egos, these identities that help people to silo themselves into different categories, I'm like, yeah, that, of course, that makes sense. Again, on the field of play, I've known this, and so it's amazing, and it's great to see that the world of psychology has shifted themselves. And just like me, Jimmy, I'm a challenger personality type. Like, I know that the alter ego thing challenges people's paradigms, but I get about 50 to 60 different DMs just on Instagram alone a week, talking about the transformational nature of this idea and helping people to revisit a way more playful side of themselves. Because at the end of the day, yes, we're talking about serious stuff here. And you were talking about, like, you're already challenged by trying to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
And my only suggestion to people is that when you watch a child who's between the age of 1 and 7 play, they're lost in the process. They are actually exhibiting flow state. Peak state. And that's because they're actually most locked into the theta brainwave state. Okay. That age 1 to 7 category, which is where we actually develop ourselves the most as an individual. Theta brainwave state is the most active. And that's where we're playing with different identities the most. And then all of a sudden our frontal lobe starts to develop and we start to reason and judge our way out of that. And the great thing about leveraging the idea of an alter ego is because it taps into your creative imagination, it actually opens the doorway to theta brainwave state, which now allows you to get into the peak state. The only purpose that I was trying to help people with in giving them the alter ego wasn't so that I could build an alter ego for people. It was because it was the fastest path that I could get people in the zone and flow state. Yeah. Which was the ultimate goal.
And you tweeted something recently that I saw. It was a video of Tiger Woods at the Masters. Yeah. And you saw, and you mentioned his facial expressions. Yeah. Because he was walking down the course after his drive, and you just saw him like locked in. Right. You saw, and you're like, that is what I'm talking about. It's sort of the gist of the tweet. And I guess my question on the topic of entrepreneurship and going a little bit deeper in terms of the areas that we don't like to talk about because we feel like we're not supposed to. Yeah. Is there some commonality or some problem that plagues entrepreneurs that they resist? Because you've coached 15,000 plus hours. Do you see something like where, okay, you know how the story is going to play out. The objection that they present to you or the problem that they present to you, you know that there's something deeper there. You got to go through a few questions, few scenarios. You got to jolt them a little bit. You got to challenge them a little bit. But then eventually you get to the actual root reason why they're underperforming or under-indexing. Do you find that there are common things that entrepreneurs and professional sports players struggle with talking about, struggle with sort of like getting to the root of, that you just see over and over again across these different industries and these different sort of spaces, if you will? Yeah.
Well, I mean, so at the surface level, or maybe even 1 or 2 levels below that, this is actually a word that's used a lot in entrepreneurship. And it's maybe the reason why people said that they got involved. And it's because they just wanted to feel like they had control of their own life. Because maybe when they were in corporate or something like that, they didn't feel like they had control. And yet that might be the initial pursuit for why, and that's fine, whatever the motivation is. But you need to unshackle yourself from control as quickly as possible, because it will trap you and it'll keep you on that hamster wheel for a very long time. Control is the last thing. And in fact, in the world of peak performance, it's the equivalent of, if I take my iPad stylus, and if I'm a golfer and if I'm gripping that thing too tightly, you've now removed all the elasticity and the agility of your muscles. And same thing goes if you're, gripping anything too tightly in life. You've lost the agility and the flexibility in order to get to where you want to go. So control is a big thing. And then what sits below that though? And that's the ability and the willingness to be really vulnerable. And that's some really good quality work that Brene Brown has done around vulnerability as an idea. And just those people. And now I'm not talking about letting all of your demons out. I'm not someone that's professing all that kind of stuff. I'm saying that, but being willing to be vulnerable to the process, be vulnerable to the team, to allow other people to help you.
Yeah.
And but I will say this, that a great majority of the people that I've worked with have all come from fairly tough backgrounds. Some trauma has sat there.
Yeah.
Some people have been through some tough stuff. Not everybody, but they've been through some tough things. It's what gave them maybe their edge. The dangerous part of that, though, because again, I've coached people through this. Now, I'm not a therapist. I don't do therapy.
Sure.
I am moving people towards improvement. And so, but a lot of people think that thing, whatever it is that gives them their edge, is actually the secret sauce for why they're performing at a top level. And so I need to detach them from that, because there's no reason that you need to be revving the sort of psychological engine at such a high RPM that just drains your energy.
Sure.
And actually keeps you in a very heightened state of, whether it's close to rage, close to anger, and things like that. And again, I'm speaking from experience, like this, not only from the coaching side, but that was a big part of my own history too. I came from some tough stuff as well as a kid, of some things that happened to me when I was young, and just being able to move through that myself is why I can feel like there's a lot of pebbles in my shoe in the world of helping people. And it's because I just get really frustrated for the people who are looking for something to help change themselves, and they're consuming information from people who haven't done the work. And that's frustrating.
There's nothing more frustrating than that, when you get people who you are trying to help get bad advice from hacks, is what you're basically saying. Tom Brady famously every season typically picks an enemy. If you're a Patriots fan, or you hate the Patriots because you're just jealous of the Patriots and their massive success, you realize pretty quickly that when the season's not going well, which is very rare because they're just so unbelievably good, he's always picking something. So I remember the year, I think it was a Seattle Seahawks Super Bowl win that we had a couple years back, where it was Trent Dilfer who was on TV, who said, "Just face it, the Patriots aren't that good anymore," right? And it was week 2 after losing to Casey or something like that. And that was bulletin board material. And I want you to go deeper on this for a second, because every entrepreneur watching right now has some level of bulletin board material that they go back to. So for me personally, as someone who just graduated high school, did not get a college degree, my bulletin board material that I hang on to is this idea that I resist the status quo of conventional education and the belief that I had to sort of wait in line to get permission to do what I wanted to do. So my bulletin board material is, well, I'm not particularly talented, I'm not particularly charismatic, I'm not particularly smart, and I can still do amazing things. So I hang on to that, Todd, as a way to sort of have that chip on my shoulder. Tom Brady uses every year, whether it's his age, whether it's a bad game, or someone talking shit about him on TV, he uses that to fuel him. What you're saying is that is not a renewable source of energy. That will eventually fade. So if there's not something deeper than that, then you're going to end up, and maybe I'm help me out here. If there's not something deeper than that, then what's going to happen is my question.
Well, what I'm saying about when people who, I'm saying people who are driven by something that is deeply traumatic.
Okay.
And the reason that I talk about that is because when you actually have a traumatic experience, what you do is there's a massive burst of cortisol that happens in the brain, and then wires get fused together. And that's why when people use the word triggered, they should actually be careful with it, because even though it's become it's become part of the social vernacular, but triggered actually means that something occurred and it actually triggered this another cortisol burst in someone's brain. I'm not talking about those slights like that. Those are healthy. 100%, and to use those to your advantage. And in fact, this is again another problem with some of the personal development world. Rage is a powerful focuser of attention.
Sure.
For people. And so athletes, I encourage them to use rage or anger, because again, the resistance of an emotion only causes you to be a slave to it. We use those things. We use them to our advantage. It's like any great thing that we've got as a capacity as a human being. When we can start to wield that as a sword for ourselves, boy, all bets are off, because now you have started to master the emotional and thinking self.
Yeah.
Boy, it's phenomenal to see when people make that mental leap for themselves.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, and I actually forgot about that Tom did that. I'm going to be borrowing that going forward too, because that constant rebirth of an enemy is, again, we live in worlds of dualities in our own head already. And that's why in the book you see me break it down. I talk about the ordinary world and the extraordinary world as a kind of just a model to kind of give people to think through. And then there's the heroic self that ends up showing up, which is brought to life by the alter ego. But conversely, there's an enemy that sits in all of us, and it's a part of us. It isn't us. It is a part of all of us. And it talks us into the shadow, brings us onto the couch, causes us to put down the phone and not make the phone call, causes us to stop typing when we want to actually reach out to Jimmy Mackin at Curaytor and pitch some sort of idea, because we think that person's on a, higher up the rung of the ladder than us. And there's the enemy saying, you know what, you don't have enough skills yet. Or what are you doing reaching out to XYZ? Lean into that. Because on the other side of that is a version of you that you're going to be really freaking happy to meet in the coming days, months, and years.
So you're saying actually it's funny because in marketing, something that we coach is this idea of developing an enemy, something you're fighting against to help shape your messaging. So an example of this most recently in marketing, first off, let me just take one step here for our audience. This is a phenomenal conversation that we're having with Todd Herman. This is incredibly, I don't give a shit if anyone's watching this thing, quite honestly, because I'm really enjoying this. This is I feel like I'm getting some free coaching here. And part of my personal goals here, Todd, is one of the things I'm realizing being running this company now for the last 7 years with Chris is it's a mental game now. It's like 100%. It's all about, and so I'm starting to appreciate the mental side of the business a lot more than I was earlier in my career. But here's what I wanted to get at there. This idea of developing an enemy, and an example of the marketing world is when Bud Light during the Super Bowl came out with their massive campaign, they picked an enemy, and the enemy wasn't Miller Lite, it was corn syrup. And if you were associated with corn syrup, you were essentially developing a lower quality product. So in marketing, we see this all the time, where you kind of have to have an enemy, a point of contention or a force of bad against what you're doing to sort of help focus your energy on what you're doing well. It's a little different, but I see certainly some of the parallels there. My original question was, I was asking about, are there problems that entrepreneurs and athletes experience that they resist talking about? And you started going down this path of control, giving up control. You talked about vulnerability. Is there anything deeper than that? So let's say I'm one of your coaching clients, and you say, okay, Jimmy, you run a 60-person company. You cannot control every aspect of the business. You've got to let people be successful. So talk to me, and then you say, let's be more vulnerable. Where are you, let's say, inefficient or bad at your job? I open up there. Keep going down that path for me if you could. What's next?
Well, the thing that people get really uncomfortable about, because the path where I'm leading towards is, I want to peak performance, by the way, is about removal, subtraction, and deletion. Okay. Always keep this in mind. The people who are operating at the peak levels of any business world are extraordinarily focused, and they have stripped stuff away that does not serve them in that moment or in that pursuit of whatever their current mission or goal is. And I say that because I'm trying to strip away as much of the exterior layer that people will kind of say or articulate as to why they're not achieving something. And it's typically like, oh, it's because of, where I'm at, or it's because of my team. I don't have my team, or fundamentally, all of that creates stress because they're all things that are feeling like they're outside of your control. The world of sport and business feels like an outcome-driven world. It's medals. It's, did you win the game? Did you win the Super Bowl? Did you get the Inc. 500 list or whatever it is? It's badges. It's medals and trophies. But if you only focused on those things, you're going to be a highly stressed and anxious individual because you don't have control. So I'm trying to get people down to the stuff that they can control, which is all process related stuff or themselves. I say this because as I'm asking questions, as we're breaking through the world of control and getting to like maybe being a little bit more vulnerable, what I'm trying to eventually get to is seeing that a lot of the reasons why some people will not pursue something that's important to them is because they're worried about getting judged by other people, their tribe. It's just baked into us, anthropologically, where if we got kicked out of the tribe 3,000, 5,000 years ago, we're going to go die in the wilderness because now we're alone and the saber-tooth tiger is going to get us.
Yeah.
However, the flip of that is actually the more insidious one. People are actually more hurt by the arrows that have been shot from their own bow at themselves. The self-judgment kills people.
Yeah.
I say all this to get to your point. The deeper thing that I'm trying to get to, Jimmy, is what are the things that you're saying to yourself because you're not doing something? It's the self-judgment. And as someone who works, intimately with a handful of people still, I've got, a leveraged training company and all that, but I need 100% truth and honesty from someone. And this goes for anyone that's listening. If you've got teams of people, when you can have people who are real with you, they're honest with you, they're truthful about, why they're not pursuing something. Now you have a blank slate to build something off of. Because when someone isn't giving you the whole truth, they're not giving you all the data, you're essentially building your plan of action, your map towards something off of or on sand. It's not. And that's why in my world, that's why I don't share who I work with privately in the pro athlete world, because now all of those guys know that I'm the one guy who's not trading on the back of their name. And so I get referred clients every single week because of that. Because that's all people are around them. They're all hangers-ons and they all want something from them. And I've never asked anyone for a ticket to come to a game.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, that's where we're getting deeper to is I want to know how you perceive yourself. Because that's the narrative that we can work with and build off and onto something that's stronger. I don't know if that helps, if that kind of articulates it in a different way.
It's fascinating in every sense of the word. And this goes back to, I was telling Todd offline, or maybe I said it online, I don't even remember. I was saying like this, I'm going to try to be Larry David and just be like very honest about how I felt about the book prior to reading it and then how I felt about it afterwards. And this is probably the moment that I felt like this is for real. Because I had a high degree of skepticism going into the book. Listen, Phil Jones, my co-author for Exactly What to Say for Real Estate Agents, recommended it. I love Phil. I'm still a guy who's going to check the Yelp reviews, even if my buddy recommends it to be a great restaurant. That's just my personality, right? So I had a high degree of skepticism going into it, but that was the moment where you got me. That was the moment where you start talking a little bit about this idea of the stories we tell ourselves in terms of why we don't achieve our potential are the worst sort of thing, worst factors, if you will, that go into this whole process. Because it's kind of like the lies that we tell ourselves. We just assume that they're true. They're irrefutable. These are true. I am the way I am. It's for me, I'm disorganized. So I don't try to get better at being organized because I know I am just disorganized. Well, am I really? The team is probably going to be behind me laughing. Yes, you are, Jimmy. But you tell yourself that story and that becomes a narrative. But to your point, that is a self-inflicted wound that you have created for yourself that causes you to basically underperform or just really stress the fuck out about what you're doing all the time because you're worried about trying to overcome these demons that you have. So I got so many more questions and I want to be respectful.
Keep firing away. Keep firing away.
Okay. Because
by the way, today's my birthday. I was just hanging out with my two little girls, so I have the afternoon clear.
There you go. Well, it's happy birthday. This is a classic entrepreneur just working on their birthday. By the way, I think every person I meet in this business just doesn't celebrate their birthday.
But it's not, but again, that's the thing is and this is the other shit that's out there is that working's bad nowadays. It's I love what I get to do. I mean, wow. What an honor it is for me to take the stuff that I have been sinking my entire self into for 20 years and being able to share it with, one or two more people that get it.
That's it. This is a good path for us to go down because I think it is something that causes people a lot of guilt is working really hard and loving what you do. I work on every vacation. I know, and I stop feeling guilty about that a couple years ago. So every vacation I go on, I work. And what I do is I have an arrangement with my wife where I say, hey, I'm going to just like get this stuff going because I love what I do. And I'm in my happiest, most creative place when the work I do on vacation is not day-to-day grind. It's like, thinking about ideas and planning and strategizing and having that 30,000 foot view. So when we go on vacation anywhere, I find a great coffee shop. I go there, I work there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then I'm able to enjoy the rest of the day because I'm not worrying about sort of like being in the moment with her and thinking about what I want to do for work. What is your thought on this idea? Because I think every single person out there conveniently talks about work-life balance after they made it. They're all saying, hey, don't work really hard, even though they spent 10 years fucking busting their ass to, and now they're like, oh, cool. Like, hey, 40 hours a week, work week is fine. 30 hours is fine. Like, don't hustle too hard. Like, I'm going to go on just one rant. I want you to kind of
do it because I'm with you.
Well,
I hitched my wagon on it.
I think about people that I admire. There's a Walter Isaacson quote I wrote down prior to this interview. One of the ways to remember who you are is remember who your heroes are. Walter Isaacson, who wrote the Steve Jobs biography. My favorite biography actually was the one about the Wright brothers that he wrote. It was a phenomenal book. And I think about the Wright brothers, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, every one of the people that I admire, that I've read about, they like the Wright brothers. The quote that I remember for Walter Isaacson's book was, they went to the Carolinas and Kitty Hawk and they flew. He said the people they were in a town which was like a town of fishermen, and it was all blue collar working class people that like farmers. They know how to put in an honest day's work, and they don't talk about it. They don't wear shirts to say I hustle. It's just part of their day, right?
Love it.
And he had this quote, and he goes, the people in the town would say, those are the workingest boys I've ever seen. And they'd get up before sunrise, and they'd work, and they'd work after sunrise, and they would So I think there is and I'm with you on this, and I want you to talk about it. I think there is this connotation about working hard is now a negative thing because it's taking away from other parts of your life. I don't know any successful person who hasn't put the work in.
Yeah. So I have an interesting experience of this, and that comes from where I grew up. So I grew up on a big farm and ranch, like I said. Yeah. The beautiful thing about growing up on a farm and ranch is there is no separation of work and home. Yeah. Right? Our house is literally surrounded by our farm and the work. And so I just didn't grow up around this idea that, oh, dad's coming home from work. It's like, no, we're just all living there. Yeah, sure. And now living here in New York City, I always knew that whenever time came that I had children, I got 3 little ones here in New York, that we would integrate. I don't believe in balance. Yeah. And so I think a really good kind of meta idea for everyone to hold in their head is that if something doesn't exist in nature, it probably doesn't exist, period. Here's what I mean. Balance does not exist in nature. Doesn't exist. There's no state called balance. So why pursue this thing called balance? Nature tries to, there's this ebb and flow, right? I grew up on a big farm and ranch. So the deer population would start to grow. Then the coyote population would come up behind it. The deer population would start to get diseased and they would die off. And then the coyote population would lag in behind because now they're losing. And so balance doesn't exist. I look at integrating. So I hold big live events and stuff every year. And as soon as you turn 2 in our family, you have to come and do a speech on my stage. So my Molly, Sophie, my little guy, Charlie, who's 2.5, they've all stood on stage and done speeches. And when I say speeches, they're doing their favorite song or their favorite poem, but I want to integrate them into my world. And I'm not someone who's using my kids in a business way, but I was sure as hell used in a business way for my dad. I mean, I had chores at the age of almost 5 years of age. I had to milk the cow in the morning and collect the chicken eggs. Yeah. So I'm completely on board with you with the whole idea of work. And I think that's such a great quote that they were the workingest boys in our town. What a great quote. Yeah. But on that, I will challenge people with this. And this is probably where the most resonant idea I've shared with people whether it's Tom Ferry's group, whether it's the YPO groups that are out there, athletes, is the idea of translating this to you being a superhero to your kids and as a family person. Because there's this idea that people get home and they just spent all their energy at work, and I get home and, there's this commentary around, I got nothing left for the people that I care about the most. Wait a second. When did energy all of a sudden become something that is used up throughout your day? Here's what I know. You can recharge yourself in a fucking instant as a human being. So when I walk through the doors, even though I'm a challenger personality type in the way that I show up in my business, because I'm trying to crack, shells of paradigms that are out there to give people a new concept of how they can actually be operating based in science, based in experience. Because in the book, I've got tons of science that's in there as to why this works. But when I walk through that door, these glasses are never on. I have a little bracelet that I have sitting at the front door that's like this one, except it's colored beads made by my daughter Molly. And I think of that door again. I teach visualization with the people that I work with, and how to build up mental movie theaters in your brain or in your mind to go and practice in and see things before they happen, to build up levels of confidence and certainty. And so that door has a blue glow. And when I walk through that, blue is my power color. Okay. And I use this with especially golfers, trying to find power colors for them. And when I walk through that door, that's me going into dad mode. And I'm going to bring it for them now, because I just brought it for all my clients all day. And now these people are my most important ones. They're going to get it now too. And I pull that bracelet off the hook, and I put it on and I snap it. And now my inspiration for how I want to show up for my kids is inspired by both my father and Mr. Rogers. Because Mr. Rogers is the opposite polarity of how I'm showing up every single day as a business person.
Sure.
So I don't want that challenger person to come out, because it's naturally going to be there anyway, because I've been flexing that muscle for so long. But now I want that patient, playful, understanding, kind, individual to show up. And so I'm honoring that spirit of those people in that moment. And I am not allowed to wear, if I ever catch myself, flying off, if I was flying off the handle, that bracelet has to come off, because only when I'm in that mode am I capable of wearing that bracelet and honoring those people.
I think it's just an incredibly powerful lesson for our audience, because in real estate, as you mentioned, real estate is like working on a farm, and there is no separation of church and state.
Big time.
Their weekends, their nights, their days are consumed by their high demanding clients. So there is no boundaries, because the time in which people generally need help is after their workday, which is when most real estate agents' days actually start. I made it a point in this conversation, Todd, not to talk about a lot of the principles that you mentioned in the book. You're alluding to many of them, and I'm tempted to try to go deeper on them. But I want our audience to buy the book, and I want them to experience the value of the lessons that you coach and the movement that you're trying to start. Because I find that anyone who can help with the mental game of running a business is doing the real work, because that is where it all kind of unfolds for most people. Let me ask you just a few more questions, and we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you get back to your big birthday celebration. So, why is self-awareness so difficult?
Ooh, loaded question. But self-awareness is difficult because of getting to that idea of self-judgment, that ability for us to be honest with ourselves without attacking ourselves. That's the problem with it, is that when we notice something about ourselves, we judge ourselves on it. We layer on a bunch of emotion, as opposed to just saying, here's a statement to use for yourself. Because I know you love actionable stuff when you do this, is when you notice something about yourself, whether good or bad, just get used to this statement. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting that when someone might throw a cutting comment or a slighting comment my way, or a slight comment that slights me, that I respond so angrily inside, and I don't even say anything? Or isn't it interesting that when I have an idea, a good idea, I don't speak up in the office because I'm so concerned, or a better way of even saying it is, the version of me right now is so concerned about what other people are going to think of me. Isn't it interesting? I wonder where that comes from. And I wonder how life could be different for me if I acted through a different behavior, different action. Key there is version of you. That you are not you. You is a trapping question or a trapping word. There is no you. There are versions of you constantly unraveling. And when you're like, if you're listening to this podcast, I mean, come on, folks, you're in the top 1% of 1%. Like people don't listen to and consume information that don't have a feeling and a sense that they are called to do something important or to provide some sort of level of meaning on this planet before they leave. And so you're already at the top of the top. Okay. And so along that process, just understand that the current version of you that's succeeding right now is a very different version of you that's going to need to succeed 3 years from now. And when you get that, this is the power of the alter ego concept. You can actually accelerate through these growth zones so much more quickly because you're using a concept that helps to grease the slide towards that so fast.
Yeah, I think we all experience this at one point in our lives, and when we run businesses, is that when we're actually honest about why we do what we do, and we really get to the truth, we always ask ourselves, why the hell did it take so long for me to just sort of get to this moment? And I love what you said there, because I was thinking to myself, all the little things I do every single day, like when I order Starbucks coffee, I get the milk on the side.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I do that, but that's interesting, right? I'm thinking to myself, like, there's like I'm starting to think, like, why do I do the things that I do? Can actually help you understand maybe at a deeper level, and hopefully maybe, and this is a bad example of Starbucks coffee because I don't think there's any Zen takeaway there. Maybe there is, but it gives you sort of that thought of like, you can start to reflect on yourself, because I think people who say, well, I'm very self-aware, are generally very unaware of their self, right? It's like people usually like to proclaim that. Last question for you. And we're going to have a slide, I believe, where people can get Todd's book, and we'll share it and we'll post it and promote it and all that, and the emails after today's podcast. As a business owner, we have lots of business owners who are watching this podcast, Todd. And one of the things that I think every business owner does well is they pay attention to the qualities they want to foster in their team. Meaning, what are the things that their team is really good at? And we got people here who are exceptionally good at a particular activity. And I always say to myself, okay, I just want more of that person to show up on the field of play. So as a leader of people, whether you're a real estate agent who's got 5 people on their team, or you're trying to grow your team, or you get a brokerage of 100 people, this is a crazy question, but can you impose an alter ego on someone else?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Not a crazy question.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, that's the work that I do with organizations. And I'll give you an example of this. And this is such a powerful way to allow people to actually really enjoy their day. And there's this big call center I worked with up in Canada. And when you think about call centers, these are people who are typically not getting like, hey, just wanted to call and let you know that you guys are amazing.
Yeah,
and
sure.
They're getting, the shit rolls downhill kind of thing. And so you've got someone, Debbie, who shows up and she puts her headset on, and then the phone starts ringing away, and she's helping people. Sometimes people get on there and they've been on hold for 5 minutes or whatever, and so they're frustrated and they're angry, and she's getting the brunt of it. And so Debbie goes home, and it's a long day, and your energy to her gets depleted, right? And then that's the Debbie that gets to go home to her kids, and now they don't get the best of Debbie. Instead, what we did was we looked at, if we could build the perfect customer service rep, what would be the attributes and qualities that they would have? Okay. And we did this with the customer service team. They would be patient. They would ask really thoughtful questions. They would, as someone got angry, they would get kinder even. So I was like, wonderful, great. So we had all these attributes and qualities of this like super agent. And then what we did was we said, okay, this is the self that you step into. Now, the great thing about it is, Debbie, we don't want you to use your personal name. Your personal name is reserved for the people that you love and that love you. Yeah. When you come in, your name is Christy. Choose a name. You get to choose. And so he's like, hi, Christy speaking, right? And you're going to be acting through that. It's the power of giving something form and substance. You talked about the enemy before. Tom doesn't need to think of this amorphous idea of an enemy when he has Trent Dilfer, and he knows what Trent Dilfer looks like. So you think of something form and substance, automatically nothing scary about it. Now you can actually battle against it. That's why in all those horror movies, when you don't know what the thing looks like, it's terrifying. As someone who hates horror movies, it's terrifying when you don't know. And so now you give it form and substance. This is the power of what I talk about in the book when you're building out this like powerful identity, which actually draws out attributes that were already there. Like when I go home, that patient, that kind, that playful person, that person's inside of me already. It just doesn't get flexed all day long in the business role that I play. But when I go home, I want to intentionally flex that. So absolutely, you can 100% talk about, hey, as an agency, this is the role that you're stepping into when you're an agent here. At this agency, this is what our agents look like. This is what we sound like. And you can add a little bit of color to it if you want, but these are the attributes that you possess. Okay. And so, on a phone, it's easy to create that kind of secondary avatar that people can kind of work through. Maybe in a personal life, when you're working out your as a real estate agent, you don't get to do that. You don't get to have that sort of secret identity, but you can still work through it in your own head. But coaching people to a role is so powerful, because what that does is it says, I see in you these qualities already, and there is a Venn diagram that we're going to bring over top of you. And then one day, just like Cary Grant, you're going to find out that you've become the person that you most want to be. You're going to become the agent that you most wanted to be.
Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful idea, and I'm glad that I wasn't completely insane suggesting it, because that was one of my sort of Zen takeaways from the book. Because I think everyone who's watching today's podcast and listening to the replay later on is going to want to apply these concepts not only to themselves, but to help foster it within their teams. Because if they can get an organization all moving in the same direction, operating at a really high level, you're in team sports all the time. It ain't about LeBron. It's about the people around him. Although in some cases he can get some pretty terrible players to the championship. For the most part, it's like the people around you that help you bring to the highest level. Guys, the Water Cooler is a show about marketing, sales, and technology. Each episode, we focus on bringing advice that works. I was honored today to have my man Todd Herman, who is the best-selling author of The Alter Ego, join us today. Todd, thank you so much for being on today's show. We really appreciate everything.
Appreciate you, Jimmy.